All right. Hi, everybody. Hopefully, everybody got the note last week that I was doing a little bit of a reduced workload. I've come down with a pretty gnarly cold, so I just have been just a little bit behind on my planning. I knew what I wanted to talk about, but I hadn't gotten the material ready. And there's some further research that I needed to do in order to do this right. And so kind of took an easy week and just looked at, working memory. But now we are on to what I think is probably one of the most interesting topics in this course. And, this is to me why I enjoy teaching is engagement science. Um, and as I know that a variety of different people are taking this course. We have some who are, I guess, students who are in classrooms taking classes. We have working adults. We have those who are teaching third grade, and then we have those teaching college even. And because we have such a variety, I am going to try to use examples that can connect with everybody at some point in this class. But of course, engagement science is a huge topic and it is a little bit developmental. And so what works for a fifth grader, or excuse me, a 5-year-old might not work for what works for a 17-year-old, so to speak. But engagement science is something I think every teacher really needs to understand. I think once you understand engagement science better, you instantly become a better teacher. It's one of those, in my opinion, it's one of those concepts that leads to a large marginal gain right away, and then even after that large marginal gain, every bit of information you gain afterwards is another big marginal gain. You can't really study this enough, in my opinion. And so while I'm really, we started with working memory and those concepts, those feed right into engagement science. So we've kind of already started it. And then next week we're going to hit engagement science again by looking at motivation. Okay. But this week we're going to focus on two parts of engagement science, which is attention and the term itself, engagement. We can't understand engagement science until we take a little bit deeper dive into the attention component that we started 2 weeks ago. Here's our definitions. Remember, we are not defining attention or engagement behaviorally, and that's really, really important. We are defining them cognitively. We don't really want to talk about these in a behaviorist way, simply because paying attention and cognitive attention are actually two completely different things. Okay? We use them the same way and we run into trouble because of that. We talk about kids being engaged because they look like they're working or paying attention, but are they truly engaged is the question cognitively. So these are our cognitive definitions. Attention is the choice for one to process a stimulus in their working memory. Okay, that's our definition of attention. Engagement is upon giving something your attention, it's the process of giving it further consideration. Okay? And we're going to go into both of these very deeply. So I'm not going to belabor the points. But in order to get engagement, it typically requires attention, meaningfulness, and effort. Okay? The processing that is done, I said, up here I use the word process. The processing is done through elaboration, illustration, or deep consideration in order to store in long-term memory. And that is, of course, we're using neuronic language now. We're talking about synaptic connection between our neurons so that when we go to retrieve something, there are ample neural pathways. I said amply, has ample neural pathways for retrieval. So rather than having to fish for that concept and spend a long time, or I can't remember it and Google it on my phone, if something is truly, 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 truly learned and understood and cared about, we're able to get there very, very quickly. It's kind of like why 2 plus 2 is so easy now, and 2 times 6 is so easy now. And if you know your rules of 9, then 9 times 8 is really easy now, 72, boom. But some people, it's harder. You don't know your rules of multiplying by 9, and so that was harder to get to than it was. Or if you have, we can start talking about other subjects as well. There are things that upon doing enough times and thinking about deeply enough, it just happens instantly. Some people can do it with calculus, and I'm just like, whoa, you've got the chain rule memorized. We're not going to talk about calculus in this, though, anymore. Moving on. Let's start with attention. Well, actually, this leads us to two questions, right? What is attention? Because I set up here, attention is, we need to understand attention because it's a part of engagement. And then how do you foster deep engagement? So those are the two questions we're going to answer in today's video. Okay. Attention. For your assignment this week, the very first question on it is this. What are the things competing for your students' attention? Or if you are not currently teaching, then what do you remember competing for your own attention when you were a student? Okay? When we talk about attention, we are talking instinctively, inherently, readily. We know this is something that we are thinking about or focused upon, but other things are distracting. Okay? So what are those other things? What are the things distracting us or our students from giving our attention? I'll give you my quick example. When I taught 7th grade English, during SSR especially, my kids always struggled to pay attention. And one of the reasons I started picking up on, I wanted to know, what is competing for their attention? Is it social or what is it? And they always would ask to use the bathroom. And it gave me a hint because I was the bathroom monitor on my hall, and there was always trouble in there, and kids were always on their phones. So I realized the thing competing for their attention in my class during SSR was their phone. And they asked to use the bathroom as a means to go get on their phone, which means, and we kind of read a little bit about that last week for the abbreviated assignment. The phones were their distraction at that moment. The phones are typically a distraction. They're a huge distraction. We just need to be aware of those. So I quickly came up with a policy and tried to alleviate that distraction. I didn't just want to alleviate no phones. There needs to be a way to make kids feel like they don't have to be distracted by their phones. Okay, it's a very difficult thing to kind of figure out. And if anybody gets this one figured out, please let me know. If you can figure out how to make the phones not a distraction cognitively, and rather than just put forward a behaviorist approach of no phones in class, and if I see your phone, I'm taking it. Well, the kids are still distracted by their phone, whether it's in their backpack or in their pocket or with you, maybe even in their locker. Sometimes it's still a distraction. How do we alleviate that distraction is a huge question I have. It's a very important question. Leave them at home? I don't know. Really, really important subject in today's schools, though. So, we could talk about attention as a behavior, and we often use phrases like getting their attention or making them pay attention, or we that's the same thing with the phones. Like, we think taking their phones relieves the distraction of their phones, when in reality, attention's cognitive. It's not behavioral. Even if you take that phone, they're still going to be distracted. That's not the goal. You're looking for their attention, not for them to have one less distraction. Okay? It's cognitive. Because this is cognitive, I want to remind you that it is a muscle, right? Maybe not actually a muscle. It's like a muscle. But as students pay attention, they get better at paying attention. If you use your attention, it gets stronger. If you never use it, it remains weak. Okay? So we got to practice paying attention so that we can get better at it. But in our students, I really, really want to know, how do you grow that muscle? How do you help them grow that muscle? That's an important question. Why is it so important? Well, because it's not just a muscle that does one thing. There's actually 5 types of attention that we need to grow. Okay? And I'm not sure if you guys have heard these before. You've probably heard of them without realizing that engagement science breaks them into 5 components. Okay, well, actually 6. We can debate that next. We need to realize that when a student struggles to pay attention in a cognitive analysis, it means they're likely struggling with 1 or 2 elements of attention, not attention holistically. Okay, sometimes they're struggling with arousal. Okay, it's simply, are they alert or not? Are they tired or energized? If they're exceptionally tired because they stayed up late playing video games and didn't go to sleep when they should have, getting their attention is harder because the type of stimuli and the amount of stimuli needed to activate their brain in the first place is different than if they're well rested. An 8 a.m. class is an example of this as well. Sometimes students struggle to pay attention in 8 a.m. classes simply because their alertness is so low. What's interesting is by 9 a.m., that's actually typically viewed as the best time to get attention, is 9 to 11 a.m. Super interesting to me. And that relates to this arousal, right? Our attention is strongest, our alertness is strongest between 9 and 11 for most people. Focused attention. This is the ability to put your attention on one stimulus, okay? Sustained attention. This is the ability to put their focused attention on that stimulus for a period of time. You hope it's a long period of time. This is typically what a lot of students struggle with, not focus. They're able to focus, they just can't do it for a long enough time. Okay? Or we'll get into a different part of this in a moment. Selective attention. This is in the presence of distractions or other stimuli. This is their ability to attend to the one stimulus they're told to attend to. And then alternating attention is if you're asking them to attend to 2 stimuli, are they able to bounce between them? Okay, which leads us to the debate, which is the 6th type of attention. Divided attention. There is a debate. Can people pay attention to 2 things at once? Most research says no, you cannot. It is impossible. You are not actually able to pay attention to 2 things at once. Instead, people are really good at alternating attention, this one back here, and it looks like they're paying attention to 2 things at once. They're not actually able to do 2 things at once, and that's a working memory principle, okay? The working memory has slots in it, and you can bounce between those slots, but you can't activate 2 at the same time, okay? And so research is suggesting no, there's no such thing as divided attention. You can't put your working memory on 2 things at once. Some research actually shows that women in particular are getting or are more able to do that. And again, this is likely a practice thing. And there's a lot of research to suggest that men have somewhat of I don't think this is actually cognitively different between men and women. I think socially, this is my opinion, and you can debate, but I think socially, men have been given less double standards. Men are privileged in this sense, and I think in a way it's a part of the inherent sexism in our society that men are often given like this pass of like they can only focus on one thing at one time, versus women are almost expected to focus on 2 things at a time and be okay with it and be good at it. And it's like this double standard that exists. So I believe that this debate exists because of social structures. Now we can have that conversation sometime if you would like. I think it's a very interesting conversation. It is a conversation that has more to do with social constructivism than cognitive constructivism, and it's a conversation worth having for sure. So 1 or 2 really important things I want to make note of with attention. If you have a squirrely student, you need to think about which type of attention they struggle with or lack. Don't just say they can't pay attention. They struggle with attention. They struggle with focus. We want to be sure to think about it. They struggle with sustaining their attention. They struggle with putting their attention on one stimulus. They struggle with getting the distractions out of their mind. Oh, a distraction came up and that's just, they can't handle it. That's different than saying they can't pay attention. They can't switch attentions, and I'm asking them to, okay? We need to know the type of attention students struggle with. Do not make the mistake of treating all attention deficits the same. There's a reason they're categorized in 5 ways. If we think of attention as just one thing, we'll run the mistake that I think is really affecting the American education system a ton, and that is we treat all ADD the same. We'll put them on meds and we tell them to figure it out. Okay? It's not the best approach. There are cases when that is the best approach, probably. But there are other cases when students are just struggling with one type of attention, typically sustained attention. And we need to help them learn strategies to sustain the attention. Okay? It's a muscle, remember? Not actually, but it's like a muscle. You can train it. And we need to be willing to train it. Now, if it's just completely out of control, I get it. It's so stressful as a teacher. But do not make the mistake of treating all attention deficit disorders the same. There's 5 different types of deficit disorders based on the 5 types of attention, okay? You could argue that arousal, there's no such thing as a deficit disorder for this. This just is habitual. This is behavioral. This is go to bed on time, okay? I think if kids went to bed on time, worked on their phones all night, playing video games all night, I think a lot of these will naturally actually be a lot better. And again, I have a soapbox here if you want to hear it. But I'm really, it makes me very upset thinking that, anyway, this is more of a conversation about parenthood than anything else. So I'm not going to go into it, but I could. Ugh. Okay, moving on. One thing I need to bring up before we get into the engagement side. In some cases, people have increased neuron plasticity. And in those cases, people with increased neuroplasticity will exhibit super similar behaviors to people who have an attention deficit of some sort. And in these cases, here's what's happening. The working memory is connecting the stimulus to an existing neural pathway very, very quickly, which is exactly what you want this to happen, okay? In other words, the students learn super fast, okay? The student is learning so fast that they don't even need to sustain their attention in order to learn it, okay? This is also what happens when someone already knows something and you're teaching to them at the level that they have already surpassed, and they already know it. That neural pathway is already connected. They're moving forward. It's done. And then we ask them to do it again, and we wonder why they are struggling. We are asking them to place sustained attention on something with the assumption that that sustained attention is what they need for synaptic connection. But in reality, the synapses are already connected, okay? And so that's what leads to conversations like, well, they have ADD, but they're super smart. It's interesting. I think you could argue it's not a deficit disorder to begin with. It's simply neuroplasticity working as it's supposed to, and we need to increase the rigor of the course, okay? Rather than labeling them as erratic or having a disorder, they are incredibly processing information quickly, connecting it to the existing pathways, and we need to challenge them. We need to find a way to make school interesting to them. But if we look specifically at their behaviors, they're going to look like they are struggling to pay attention. Okay, don't make that mistake, okay? We all know kids like that. We all know people like that. When learning's happening fast, be thankful it's happening fast and find a way to make it rigorous, okay? Don't just label them as the screwball in the class that never pays attention. They paid as much attention as they needed to get the learning done. You can't ask them to pay more attention to something if they've already learned it, okay? Moving forward, though, this is, I think that's a really important note. Let's move on to engagement. We've talked specifically about attention, and now I want to talk about engagement. Here's an equation that I really like for engagement. Engagement equals attention plus meaning plus effort. And we've talked a lot about this attention thing. We're going to talk about meaningfulness is probably just more of a 3 R's concept, being relational, rigorous, and relevant. You get your meaningfulness from the 3 R's. And then the effort component is tricky because it relies on motivation. We're going to spend all of next week talking about it. But we know that engagement leads to long-term memory. It leads to true learning. It learns to learning that is not lost. It leads to learning that helps people make sense of the world and identify themselves in the world. Okay, that's good. We want that. One writer put it this way. I was getting ready for this presentation and reading a great article. I think I'll put that article up on Moodle so you can read it if you would like. Cognitive engagement in the classroom can be characterized as a psychological state in which students put in a lot of effort to truly understand a topic and in which students persist studying over a long period of time. We have our sustained attention there. We have our focused attention, a topic, singular. Persistence, sustained attention. It's understanding that topic, which is getting at that idea that the understanding with connection in our brain is taking place. So really good definition, I think. And this definition is suggesting 3 things, and these 3 things are in a lot of other articles as well. This is just engagement science at its roots. The 3 conditions, this is in the equation as well. Students are interested in the topic at hand. This is the attention piece. They engage in a type of deep thinking called theory construction, and we're going to go through that next week as well. This is probably the hardest part. This is the effort component, right? Theory construction. Piaget calls it schemas. We've kind of covered it with Piaget before, but it's the idea that they're understanding something fully and they're understanding the why, not just the what. And then, we're going to talk about this one today, autonomy in the learning process. So these are the 3 components of engagement. We've got attention, we have deep thinking and effort and care, meaningfulness, and then we have autonomy. They do it on their own. It means something enough to them that they do it on their own. It can be hard because this also relates to motivation. And motivation is a key piece of this autonomy component. We'll focus on it next week entirely. There's my note about that. So how do we get these 3 components? How do we get attention, effort, and autonomy? Or attention, meaningfulness, effort. I guess I'm mixing up my equation right now and mixing up my terms. I'm sorry. How do we get those? Well, one of the most common models for getting true engagement is called the gradual release of responsibility. And I'm sure most of you have heard this term, GRR, gradual release of responsibility. It is a term for scaffolding students in a way that leads to autonomous learning. The end of GRR is autonomous learning. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about that autonomous learning component because it's pretty difficult. GRR is how I think a very good way of thinking about it is. And here's, you've probably heard of GRR before. A lot of times it's packaged as I do, we do, you do, okay? Or you watch me, I help you, and then I turn you loose, okay? It's this model that at the end, the role of the teacher is to start with the student, but not end with the student. We start together, we work together, and then you have to end on your own. You have to show me if you can do it on your own. I prefer the watch, try, show model because I like the word try a lot. I think the word try is an underutilized word because we a lot of times don't actually want our kids to try. We just want them to do it right. Okay? But I think the word try is a better word. It's an attempt. And if they don't get it right, it's okay. But watch, try, show. It's student-centered. Okay? You watch, you try, you show. I'm not in it. You're watching, you're trying, you're showing. It's student-centered language. So I prefer that model. But I do, we do, you do. Watch, try, show. All explaining the gradual release of responsibility in which the teacher starts, then the teacher and the student collaborate, and then the student ends on their own with autonomy. It always has to start with high levels of scaffolding, doing work together, explanations on the board or in notes. It's teacher-led learning at some point, okay? There's a reason the teacher's in the room. There's a reason the zone of proximal development has the what the student can do with help component. We're focused on that what the student can do with help component. But we realize we've got to give them a lot of help to start. So after that teacher-led part, it moves to this partnership part. The student-teacher partnership and learning. That's what the point of an assignment is, or a formative assessment, or the students are doing a practice of some sort, and the teacher is collaborating with them and giving them feedback. Okay, then it ends with the autonomy part, and this is how it really, really matters. Okay, in many instances, the student-only part, the you do, the autonomy component is a test or a quiz. That is a problem, folks. According to engagement science, tests or quiz that cover information that only ever came from the teacher never move students into the autonomy component of the engagement process because they are engaging in theory crafting. They are engaging in actually thinking for themselves. They are regurgitating. This is memorization. This is not synthesis. This is not synaptic connection. Studying for a test doesn't actually lead to long-term results in so many cases. It might be good for data because you need something to show your school that kids are learning. It is not actually good for learning, though. It's good for data, bad for learning. So, in tests and quizzes, the autonomy and the meaning are often missed. They're not thinking for themselves, and the test doesn't mean anything to them. Our summative assessments turn into data collection when they should be the opportunity to turn kids loose and increase the meaningfulness of the assignment. So how do we foster autonomy? Well, first of all, I just want to say writing is a great way. Writing, there's a lot of the I do, we do, you do model. There's a lot of the we'll do this together, but now you have to do it on your own. And it's interesting, as a former ELA teacher, the writing, I like that about writing. I like that as a student. I like that when I was a writer, I had that autonomy component. But it's interesting that with the standardized test pushing that's going on, writing is often left out because it's so hard to grade. It's subjective. So here we are once again. This is about standardized tests, not leading to learning, leading to memorization. Hey, and writing's probably the most common way that historically we have taught that autonomy and meaning component. And it is a great way of doing it still. It is always going to be a great way to foster engagement through autonomy, meaning, and effort. Okay. It is going to go away more and more, though. And I'm sad to say it because everything is leading towards standardized tests and standardized thinking. And I'm just sad about that. But anyway, stand strong. Another great way to foster autonomy is through project-based learning, PBLs. We will spend time talking about PBLs. I'll also link an article in Moodle about PBLs. Project-based learning is the epitome of the engagement process. It's we're doing this together, and I'm turning you loose, and I don't know what the end might look like. You get to choose what the end looks like. You create something. The projects and PBLs, just for those who've never done a PBL or are not familiar, I'm about to run out of time, I just realized. I'll put an article up on PBLs. Finally, we have our inquiry or discovery projects like escape rooms, gallery walks, or our competitions, because that's a motivation thing. Our takeaways are this. I got 15 seconds. You need to try to use engagement concepts, but it's easier said than done. But if you do it well, it works for every student. See you guys.